And I didn't know where Meredith would be. But granted, she also has a whole bunch of English friends, and so I had seen her the evening before, or the afternoon before, going out to meet them.
I got nightmares in my head, I fear thoughts build up until I can't feel. My mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper. I got nightmares in my head, I fear.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. So, did you catch the slip? Well, let's examine the same clip again from the daily, and this time more slowly. And again, I'm going to ask you, can you identify the crucial slip of the tongue?
And I didn't know where Meredith would be.
So Amanda starts off gulping. She looks down. She speaks slowly. She speaks more slowly than she spoke when she spoke about the other two roommates. She actually gulps audibly. Now, when she says, I didn't know where Meredith would be, well, Meredith was home that weekend. Meredith was the only person home that weekend besides Knox. So out of everyone in the villa, Knox did know where Meredith was. Well, where was she? In the villa, in her room, in her bed. She was an expat. There was nowhere else for her to go. Her boyfriend had also gone home for the weekend, Meredith's boyfriend. And so she certainly knew where Meredith would be sleeping because she lived next door to Meredith. Where was Meredith actually found at the end of the day? In her bedroom. And what she's saying is, I didn't know where Meredith would be. But Knox seems to be making the case that she didn't know and wouldn't know where Meredith was. Do you think that that's accurate? Where else would Meredith be other than at the villa over that weekend? And in terms of the residents of that house, who would know better than the only other English-speaking person, Meredith's only other equivalent in that house? Everyone else was Italian besides Amanda. Everyone else in that house was Italian. And so the two girls were spending that weekend alone together in the house. How could Knox not know that? How could Knox not know where Meredith was? Did Meredith not tell her where she was?
But granted, she also has a whole bunch of English friends.
Yes, and that is relevant, but how are Meredith's English friends relevant? Well, they are relevant in that Meredith had friends in Perugia and Knox didn't. And also, and I'm really here speaking about English-speaking friends, right? And also, Meredith's friends weren't friends with Knox. They'd met Knox, but they didn't like her. Now, if Knox doesn't admit that or say that, Solicitor did in his book Honor Bound. He wrote the following. She, meaning Amanda, had hoped to spend the evening with Meredith, but Meredith's British friends didn't like her. They found her too unrestrained in the way she acted and talked and burst into song whenever she felt like it. And Meredith never responded to her text suggesting they meet. His book also clearly states that Knox wanted to hang out with Meredith, and this is the crucial part, but Meredith didn't want to hang out with her. And then, here it is.
And so I had seen her the evening before, or the afternoon before, going out.
Knox says, I had seen her the evening before, and then with a smile she corrects herself to say, the afternoon before. And then we see this big expression on her face. In terms of the first 90 seconds of this interview, this is the most emotional and the most reaction, the most expression we see on her face. Her forehead is crinkled, her eyes are wide, her mouth is wide open, and she seems to kind of be smiling. Or perhaps there's a big effort to enunciate the word afternoon. Think about how you would say the beginning of afternoon and turn afternoon into perhaps camouflaging a big smile. And perhaps a big smile had been creeping up on her. Now, it is a very big deal whether Knox saw Meredith in the evening, because that was when Meredith was murdered, right? And let's face it, Knox does seem to start to say that she saw Meredith in the evening. And it's a big deal whether Knox saw Meredith in the evening or in the afternoon. And the afternoon is when Knox describes in her book the last time she saw Meredith. And we're going to deal with the way Knox describes seeing Meredith for the last time in a moment. Before we get to that, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. Bear in mind, I have written a couple of books on the Knox case, so I do know it quite well. So look out for some of those books. If you find this analysis worthwhile, please like, share, leave a comment. You can also hit the thanks button, and let's get started. So from Waiting to be Heard, Knox writes the following. Around noon, I was sitting at the kitchen table reading when Philomena and her boyfriend Marco stopped by to change clothes for a party. She was in a rush, and she chatted with me through her open bedroom door. How are you? She asked. Where's Meredith? I'm good, I said, just waiting for Raffaele to come over for lunch. Meredith must still be asleep. Now, it's interesting from her own version of events that in the middle of a long weekend full of parties, I mean, Philomena's going to a party, right? And it's a weekend full of parties, including Halloween. Knox has herself, in her own words, happy for solitude at home. She's a student, she's partying, or she's ostensibly partying, but just not that weekend, not the weekend when Meredith dies. Meredith is partying, Meredith's friends are partying, it's just not Knox who seems to be partying. And so Knox presents herself at home for some hours, reading. That's what she's doing. And where's Meredith? Meredith is sleeping next door, having returned late from a party Knox wasn't invited to. Even in this mini-drama of being in the villa, Knox can't say where Meredith is to Philomena or what she's doing. When Philomena leaves, Meredith gets up and has an encounter with Knox that, well, we have to take Knox's word for it because Meredith is no longer with us to confirm it. And Solicitor doesn't tell us about this either. In Knox's version of events in Waiting to be Heard, Meredith is like a chummy older sister. There's zero tension in the end. Both girls seem on good terms, friendly and happy, and each one doing their own thing. And so this is from Waiting to be Heard. And this is Knox apparently quoting Meredith Kircher. I went to a dinner party. It was amazing. They filled a surgical glove with water and froze it to make an ice hand. It looked cool, floating in the punch bowl. Then we all went dancing at Merlin's. That was Meredith's favorite pub. What about you? My Halloween was lame. I thought it was fun seeing everyone's costumes, but mostly I was bored. That is Knox giving her own account of what she said to Meredith. By the time Meredith got out of the shower, Raffaele was at our front door. And so in this short little description, she also puts Meredith in the shower, that Meredith went to the bathroom. And this is important because according to the evidence, Meredith's blood was found in the bathroom, which Knox would say, oh, I thought it was from Meredith having a period, right? Now, Knox does acknowledge something else here that was clearly true as well. While Meredith's Halloween was amazing, Knox's Halloween wasn't. Knox's Halloween was lame. Knox was bored over that same weekend. And now she's at home, alone again, reading, being lame and bored again, and Meredith is going to go out with her friends again, leaving her lame, bored roommate behind. And then Solicitor arrives. And this is what Amanda describes this next part of the afternoon, these final moments with Meredith on the day that she was murdered. This is according to Waiting to be Heard. We were eating pasta, that's Knox and Solicitor, when she came out of her room, that's Meredith came out of the room, that's the room that she was murdered in, that's the room right next to Knox's room, carrying an armload of dirty clothes to put in the washer in the big bathroom. She was wearing baggy boyfriend-style jeans. Dang, girl, nice pants, I said. Yeah, my ex-boyfriend bought them for me, she said, hip-bumping me in a response to my compliment. What are you doing for the rest of the day? Hanging out here for a while and then going back to Rafaela's, I answered. Oh, cool. I'm heading out with friends, so have a good day. And so then Meredith grabbed her purse and she said, see you, ciao. She tossed the strap over her shoulder and waved as she went through the front door. It all seems really kind of like happily ever after. Meredith is heading into happily ever after, and Amanda is also happy. She's with her boyfriend, and it couldn't be a happier little moment. But think about what's really going on here. According to Amanda Knox, Meredith's last act on earth that Amanda witnesses was Meredith taking a shower, which is, I guess, where she leaves behind her period blood, and then Meredith then does her washing. She does a load of washing. And it's all her clothing. Knox doesn't ask, can I add my clothing to it? It's only Meredith's clothes that are being washed. And did you know that the next morning, this is after Meredith was found dead, that same washing was still in the washing machine. Meredith never took her clothes out of the washing machine. And if the clothing went in at 3 or 4 o'clock that day, then why were they never taken out? Because Meredith did return to the house that evening. Why didn't she take them out? If Meredith put her own clothing into the washing machine. And so that is a question here. Did Meredith put her own clothing into the washing machine, or did somebody else? Now, in Knox's version of events, Meredith goes out again without Knox again and doesn't invite her again. And Knox, in her own version of events, is totally fine with that. Knox, having had a lame weekend so far, decides to continue having a lame weekend, and she's simply going to hang out with Solicitor, who is working on his thesis. Now, what's also not mentioned here is Patrick, who really liked Meredith and wanted Meredith to work for him, and according to some sources, no longer wanted Knox to work for him. And it's possible that on that night, Patrick said, you don't need to come into work. I know there's some sources that say Patrick actually fired Knox. So would Knox really be so amenable to a housemate given what is going on? Now, in Knox's account, she last sees Meredith in the mid-afternoon, perhaps around 3 p.m. or so, and then Meredith goes to her British friends to watch a movie and have dinner together. While Knox apparently does exactly the same thing. She goes and watches a movie with Solicitor. Why doesn't Amanda and Solicitor go and watch a movie with Meredith and with her friends? Well, they're not invited. Now, it's also in Solicitor's book, The Last Time They See Meredith, except it's minus all of Knox's warmth and fuzziness. And this is what he writes. I showed up at her apartment for a late lunch at around 2. Only Meredith was still in the house. Her chin still showed signs of fake blood, and she had the blood that she had used for a Dracula costume the night before. We asked her to join us for lunch, but she had a shower instead, did some laundry, and left around 4 p.m. So it's interesting that the 3 details Knox and Solicitor agree on, both of whom were originally suspects in Meredith's murder. Well, it is firstly the blood on Meredith's chin, the trousers that she was wearing, so the clothing that she had on, and then the fact that she was doing laundry. In effect, what are we talking about here? Blood, clothing, cleaning up. We also know that Meredith was found with most of her clothing removed, and also, crucially, her bra was removed after the crime. One excellent way to get rid of DNA would be to get rid of the clothing she was wearing when the crime was committed, along with wiping down the victim's skin, as also occurred in the JonBenet Ramsey case. Solicitor also takes a jab at Meredith in his book Honor Bound, describing her as a little distant towards him. He seems to be not terribly well inclined towards the British, writing, Meredith, the few times I saw her at the apartment, well, she was well-mannered but a little distant, as English people can be. And then Knox does the same thing. In her book, Waiting to be Heard, she writes, I discovered that Meredith's friends fit the reserved British profile. I'm sure I struck them as a stereotypically loud American. I was energetic and outspoken, even by nonconformist Seattle standards, and I was probably louder than I meant to be. She then, at the end of that, writes, a person more attuned to social norms would probably have realized that the immature antics didn't play well here. And even Knox's housemates, Philomena and Laura, would say the same thing, that she behaved in a strange way. Now, it creates an impression that the Italians, this description, that the Italians are more like Americans than the British, flamboyant, unrestrained, hedonistic. Does that seem like a likely comparison? Or are the Italians in general more conservative and in some ways more similar to the reserved Brits? If you still think Knox making a little slip about Meredith at night is a little slip, this whole question about did she go home that night was part of the substance of her defamation trial against Patrick Lumumba, her former boss. That she was at the apartment at night with Patrick when Meredith was murdered. That was the vision she saw. Or that was the vision she said she saw. Or that was the... But it's also a big part of Solicitor's story that at a certain point he couldn't be sure that Knox wasn't with him that fatal night when Meredith was murdered. This is also from Waiting to be Heard. He writes the following. By the time I had read what the police had prepared, it was deep into the night and I was exhausted and scared and I could no longer think straight. So he's saying the same thing that Amanda said. I couldn't think. I couldn't remember. Absurd as it sounds, the statement struck me as accurate enough to up to this point. I simply missed the fact that I was, from the investigator's point of view, cutting Amanda loose for the entire evening and depriving her of the only alibi she had. And guess what Knox and Celeste end up doing that night? Can you believe it? Well, it has to do with mops, plumbing, and a lot of water. And that's not what I say, that's in their own narratives. So Meredith's final act on earth was doing washing, which she doesn't actually end up doing because her clothing is washed but not removed and dried. And Knox and Celeste are on the floor in his apartment that fateful night with a mop from her apartment mopping. And these are some of the words that Celeste uses in Honor Bound. He says, we started making dinner. I soon realized that water was leaking out of the pipe under the sink. I'd had a plumber come, blah, blah, blah. I suspected he had left them loose. As Amanda and I threw kitchen towels onto the puddle on the tile floor, blah, 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 blah. And so they're on the floor wiping up water, apparently, with kitchen towels. There are puddles on the floor that they're cleaning. Is this the typical way students spend their long weekends, cleaning? It's strange because Knox was accused of not cleaning up in the villa that she shared with Meredith. But at Celeste's villa, she arrives with the mop, and now she's not the... with her tambourine. She's not the dancing queen with a tambourine. She's apparently a cleaning queen with a mop. Now let's listen one final time to that clip and think again, is this an innocent slip of the tongue or something else?
And I didn't know where Meredith would be. But granted, she also has a whole bunch of English friends. And so I had seen her the evening before, or the afternoon before, going out.
What do you think? Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.